Block Party DFS show with Jmtowin. We're going to get you guys ready for the Week 8 DFS slate here with a focus on DraftKings. We are going to do a slate overview. Then we'll go position by position, get JM's thoughts on his favorite plays. And then we'll wrap up, as always, with a lineup build on DraftKings. I'm Pete here with JM. This is the Block Party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, crack spot bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right, JM, I feel like our synergy is going to be at new levels this week since we actually got to meet up in person on Wednesday.
We don't even have to talk. We can just sit here and vibe. I don't know what the audience will think of that, but you and I'll have a good time. Yeah, it was a good chance to hang before. There we are. A couple short guys, JC Penney, at the backdrop. Yeah, I had a good time before I took the kids to the aquarium. Got a chance to hang with April a little bit. Evelyn got a chance to babysit, which was great until she tried to carry her down the stairs. So yeah, it was a good morning.
There's a few that hug at the end was more just like a grip around her neck, and I was like, oh no, I'm gonna lose April to JM's daughter here.
Gotta learn how to babysit on some test subjects. I appreciate you putting April through that.
No, it was a blast getting to meet up with you guys. It's funny because I have these people that I've done shows with for over the years, and there's still some I've never met in person, like Brick 75, Brian Hooper. We've done shows since COVID started, have never met in person with him. Chris Spags, I did a bunch of shows, so always fun when I can meet in person with a collaborator.
Yeah, Cubs fan is part owner of OWS, and he and I used to text like probably for an hour a day. He and I still talk on the phone maybe once every couple months, and he and I have never met in person. So yeah, DFS is kind of a strange world that way, in that you can create these connections, friendships. Yay, we don't need to meet up, but glad we got a chance to.
All right. You know what? As much as people would like to listen to us, wax poetic about friendship in the internet era, they want the plays. They want the good. So let's dive into the slate. Although I guess real quick, as always, and I literally can't even remember what happened last week. Oh, I know it was a very bad week for me on Underdog, specifically. A lot of the plays that were not on, like Gibbs and Mixon and Njoku, all smashed. How did week 7 go for you?
Yeah, it was a good week. It was not a great week in MME, but I had a sweat in the 1500 game changer, finished 19th there, and had some pathways to a much higher finish. So we'll take that and move on to this week. And yeah, I dodged a lot of bullets last week. I ended up underweight on Juju, and had a lot of Njoku and some other pieces that did really well. So yeah, now we turn the page to this week, where I got to say off the top, I always feel a little bit of pressure. I have to remind myself on a week like this that I'm not the only person that people get content from. And I have to remind myself of that because when I started OWS, it was just me. And this week I have a very narrow view of the slate in terms of how I'm approaching it. So I can speak to everything else, and I can speak to why I'm not as high on other spots. But I feel like viewers, if you're a viewer, if you're watching this, listening to this, take some of my thoughts with a grain of salt, in that this is how I'm attacking the slate. And I come from a background of, I spent 4 or 5 years literally just playing single entry, one roster every weekend. So I'm very comfortable putting all my chips onto one play or a couple plays. And that's kind of how I'm going to approach MME this week. I have a very narrow range of players that I'm working with in terms of higher exposure, and kind of a very specific way I'm approaching this slate. So you can get a feel for how I'm approaching this slate. You can get my thoughts on some of these spots that you've been hearing about or thinking about from other people. And yeah, we can, there's other places where you can get other bits of information from other people, but these will be my thoughts and take them as such.
Yeah, the other storyline I forgot from last week was some of the kind of difficulty around the injury reporting. We had the Jordan Whittington good to go, and then he doesn't run a single route. We had, Deebo Samuel, who, played a couple of snaps and then couldn't go. So I know a lot of people were feeling burned from that dynamic as well.
Yeah, it was just a weird week last week, and sometimes you can't do anything about it, right? We assess our play based on how we played and the decisions we were making. I would question, the Rams threw the ball 23 times because how much were they going to have to throw against the Raiders? So for me, if I got burned on Colby Parkinson or Jordan Whittington, I would maybe want to assess like why I was playing them to begin with if I thought that the volume was going to pile up on those guys in that game environment. But generally speaking, we need to assess our play independent of the results, especially when the results are injury related, because it's about making good decisions over time, decisions that'll make us money on a slate over time. And that's really what we can control and what we should be paying attention to.
Agree there. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of a slate overview here, JM. Obviously, you were mentioned it as content creators, and for you guys who are doing game by game breakdowns and all of that, it's a heavy load week with no buys, 13 games on this main slate, which obviously provides lots of opportunity angles to attack, but also a lot of surface area to cover as well. So, what are you seeing kind of from a bird's eye view of this slate?
Well, first off, why my particular focus is kind of narrowed is, and you and I touched on this when we were hanging out the other day, but and I dove deep into this on the Winner Circle podcast. I'll touch on this more deeply in the Angles podcast. I don't want to take up too much time with this, but the very short of it is that a lot of players are being priced about 1K higher than they used to be, not in terms of the player names, but in terms of the production profile. So production profiles that used to cost in the 5K price range at running back and wide receiver are now priced 6K and above. Production profiles that used to be in the 4K price range are now 5K and above. And then on top of that, defenses are taking away downfield throws. So we're not seeing as many explosive games from wide receivers. NFL teams are primarily running split backfield. So we're not seeing as many explosive games from NFL running backs. And so really stood out to me last week that P. Rich, one of our contributors, he's teach me how to on DraftKings. He won the slant last week, 10,000 entry slant contest with 180 points. But second place was 165 points. And so to me, like the data point, if people look through what was required to win the slant this week, it was 180 points. But if P. Rich just hadn't played that contest last week, the official data point for the slant would have been, oh, you only needed 165 points to win. That's we never see that, right? And so that's a function of lower scores, but then also higher pricing. And so with that higher pricing than we're used to seeing and the lower scores, players who are underpriced become dramatically more valuable than they used to be. So if a guy is 1K underpriced, or in the case of Tyreek Hill, 1.5K underpriced, and most other players are 1K overpriced, right? Most other players are 20% overpriced. Tyreek Hill is 20% underpriced. That makes him that much more valuable. So I want to be paying attention to things like that this week. And there are obviously underpriced wide receivers. Most people paying attention to the Bucs. I'm paying attention to the Browns. We'll get to that as we get throughout the show. But these underpriced pass catchers. And then it's a week where really, if I look at all the games, my wide receiver pool is very small this week. And we'll touch on that a little bit in the show. Subscribers can look at my player grid to kind of get that full look at my player pool. But my wide receiver pool is really small this week. My running back pool is large, and my running back pool is very much in line with what the field is seeing. But I see this as a week where I'll probably have a very narrow distribution of players at wide receiver and at quarterback, and then just mix and match lots of different running back combinations. So kind of play it like a single entry player on certain spots, wide receiver and quarterback, and then mix and match lots of running backs across my rosters. And same thing, defense, probably very narrow pool there for me. And then a little bit of a broader pool at tight end. But yeah, that's kind of how I'm seeing this slate. And it's a function of pricing. It's a function of none of these games look likely to turn into shootouts. Eagles and Bengals is probably the likeliest game to turn into something where you had to have the game environment. But if we played out this slate 100 times, there would be plenty of times where no game on this game shoots out, and it becomes sort of this weird mix and match type of week where we don't typically look to win tournaments that way. But this is a unique week where I think that could really play to our favor this week.
Yeah, and that dynamic you're talking about specifically with wide receivers, I've felt that this week. I've mainly been doing underdog drafts, and you just noticed how weak the wide receiver pool is relative to the running backs and other positions, and how you really want to prioritize getting some of those guys at the top because it thins out real quickly. Luckily on DraftKings, we do get some interesting salary angles. Eric in the chat wanting us to talk about the Tampa Bay wide receivers, which we definitely will do when we get there. What about as far as game environments? Because like I said, 13 games, lots of different directions you can go. Is there anything you're kind of Xing out? Anything you are circling? What do you like from a game perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'm Xing out kind of everything. And then it's like, I can take my eraser and erase the pencil X on a few of these to sort of go back to them. I see potential in Bills and Seahawks. There's obviously a lot of drawbacks in the game. Bills funnel targets away from wide receiver. Bills don't tend to give up high scores. The Seahawks force this short area target, not a lot of deep throws that they allow. And so The chance for scoring to really elevate in that spot are low, but it could happen. Eagles Bengals, like I said before, is another one of these where the Bengals are capable of putting up points. That Eagles defense has been playing better. They're taking away downfield throws as well. Honestly, the Bengals defense has been playing better. Not great, but better. And they're getting just pushed around up front. So they're still like a better run defense than people expected them to be. But that's more the linebackers doing their work, the safeties doing their work, and that defensive line is getting pushed around. So it looks like something that the Eagles would see on film and say, all right, let's attack this on the ground. And so, I think we could very much see no game environments match the price tags on players. And then, there's attraction to some of these games like the Broncos against the Panthers. We talked last week about kind of the pitfalls of playing players against the Panthers. Just teams dominate that game. And so we don't actually see a lot of big production against them. And then we got to think about like how much are they going to be passing the ball if they're in control of this game. Bryce Young traveling to Denver to take on this Broncos defense. Some of these other spots where it's like, oh man, we could get a big game from this player. But then when you really think about the game environment, you got to think, how much passing volume are we really going to see? How much opportunity is there? Probably the sneakiest game is this Colts and Texans one, just because Shane Steichen's so good at calling an offense around the talent that he has. And so if he can finally get Anthony Richardson going again, he's only completed 6 games in his career. He's played, He's played like 74 minutes against the Texans in his career. And like, if you just extrapolated what he's produced to 2 60-minute games, he would have averaged 35 points per game in those 2 games. So he's done well in this matchup. And then the Texans, a team that 56% of their games since CJ Stroud came on board, they've produced 25 plus points from at least one player on their offense. All 3 times they faced the Colts, they produced 29 plus points from at least one player. And so this is a spot where the right combination of Anthony Richardson plus a Texans piece could actually end up being something that helps you win a tournament. So, and that kind of goes to what I was saying before of like, it's a weird week where maybe it's not game stacks this week. And maybe this is a week, we always say every week is unique. It's its own puzzle that we're trying to put together. And I always say there's going to be 2 or 3 weeks a season where stacking games is not the way to win. Typically, we don't see those weeks in advance. And it's just like this big group of the field that kind of attacks games this way, mixing and matching their favorite plays. Like they get lucky on those weeks. But this is a week that I think we might be able to see it coming and actually build rosters a little differently than we typically do. So, just going to be a unique week for me. And Anthony Richardson, definitely one of the quarterbacks I like, but then I don't want to pair him with anybody, right? So kind of leads to some unique builds where Richardson plus a Texans player bets on this game environment developing a particular way, and you might be able to win a tournament that way.
Yeah, let's use that Richardson topic to kind of segue us to talking about quarterbacks. I think when I did my initial kind of overview of the slate, I was surprised at how many good punt quarterback options there were as far as cheap stuff and the higher end guys, while we, like Lamar, Hurts, Allen, not looking like extreme values. I mean, Josh Allen at 9,400. I mean, that's pretty cost prohibitive there. What are you seeing from the quarterback position?
Yeah, I've got Josh Allen at 7,800. So something's wrong on your end.
Sorry, I was on the fan. I had my tab on the FanDuel here. My bad.
But yeah, no, I mean the high end, right? I mean, you could build around that Eagles and Bengals game environment. And that brings Hurts and Burrow into play. Like I only want to play those guys if I'm building around like this game shooting out, becoming a game that you had to have. Lamar Jackson, I think that the Browns can keep this game competitive. And so that brings Lamar Jackson into play where he's just consistently produced points this year. And like we already talked about Josh Allen, so we don't need to go deeper into that. But I think all 4 of those guys are in the mix. None of them are standout plays. I'll probably end up, let's say I build 10 single entry 3 max rosters this week. I might reserve 2 of those for guys from that pool, maybe 3 rosters for guys from that pool, but I'm not kind of like going out of my way to build around that. For me, it's these cheaper guys. And, we could highlight, there's 3 guys we'll highlight here. Anthony Richardson, who we touched on, Bo Nix, who the field really likes, and Jameis Winston, who I really like. So I don't have anything strongly against Bo Nix. The issue for me is, what are his pathways to a 30-point game, right? His pathways to a 30-point game are probably really low. His best game this year has been 23, and we know just teams kind of take their foot off the gas against the Panthers. I do think Sean Payton, he's going to see on film the way that the Commanders were able to attack the Panthers last week on the ground with quarterbacks, and he's going to call some of these design run plays for Bo Nix. These rushes for Bo Nix are not all scrambles. A lot of these are designed runs. So I think that he's got some upside on the ground, maybe 50-plus yards on the ground, and then let's say he gets 200 passing yards. I think his top passing yards this year is like 236, something like that, right? So let's say he gets 200 passing yards. Then we're kind of waiting on the touchdowns to kind of push him up. I think he can top 20 points. I think he probably does. And then if you're taking a different guy, you got to kind of jump over that high owned 20, 22, 23 pointer from Bo Nix. So to me, Jameis Winston, let's talk about him, right? Because you asked who was the cover boy for this week. And I said, we probably can't do Jameis. And you said, why not? And I'm like, well, we don't want to scare everybody away, right? Let's go Tyreek Hill. But this Baltimore defense, right? They face, this is all off the top of the head, so I might have some of these slightly off, but I believe it's the third highest opponent pass play rate in the NFL. They face the sixth highest deep throw rate in the NFL. We know Jameis loves to just go back and sling it deep. And they've given up by far the most pass plays of 20 plus yards in the NFL. Teams don't try to run the ball against this Ravens defense. Last year, when the Browns were starting a similar style quarterback in Joe Flacco, it was the first 4 games he threw the ball 40 plus times all 4 games. And so this is a spot where I could easily see Jameis throwing the ball 40 plus times. And then you have all these cheap pass catchers here against a Ravens team that gives up a lot of downfield passing that should probably be in the lead and kind of be more willing as this game moves along to give up the downfield throws. So the risk with Jameis is, I mean, it's evident, right? It's that he's turning the ball over, taking sacks, making dumb mistakes, and they're killing a bunch of drives early. And then you're really just hoping for that Buccaneers style garbage time, like barrage of points from him. And maybe it doesn't come, but the upside is also, 25, 26 plus DraftKings points with really cheap wide receivers that you can bring up with him. So Anthony Richardson has a higher ceiling, but you don't get additional points added in there. So you get one thing right. With Jameis, you could easily get 3 spots right, all on the cheap, and then you can kind of do whatever you want on the rest of that roster. You can fit in Tyreek Hill, you can fit in a couple expensive running backs or 2 expensive running backs and sort of one of these 6K running backs. So just a lot of flexibility that he provides this week. And he's a guy that I'll be the field's going to be on like 2%. So I'll be like maybe 20x the field's exposure on Jameis Winston this week.
Yeah, that's why I think it's a super fun angle. I just would have assumed, like, if I didn't know anything heading into this week, there's been a lot of us calling for Jameis Winston to take over for Watson even before he got hurt. He's a very likable player. Everyone knows he has a fantasy friendly game. I thought we were going to come into this week and it's like Jameis Winston chalk week. Like everyone wants to play Jameis. I don't know if people are scared of Baltimore. I don't know if they're just looking at the team total, but to me, it does track so intuitively of like, yeah, they're going to be down. They're not going to have as much success running, and they're going to let Jameis Winston sling it around. And they've already shown a propensity for wanting to sling it. I guess that I've seen maybe some people infer that maybe they try to run it more with Nick Chubb in his second game back. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Baltimore's going to be in the lead. You can't run against Baltimore. I mean, teams don't just call plays that aren't going anywhere. So, and now Ken Dorsey's taking over the play calling. I think that's the weirdest thing for me. Ken Dorsey was brought in, Kevin Stefanski, 2-time coach of the year for whatever that's worth, and has been the play caller, right? And he's had this kind of outside zone bootleg type offense. And they brought in Ken Dorsey to run a different offense, an offense that more suited Deshaun Watson's supposed strengths. So it was Ken Dorsey's offense. Kevin Stefanski was calling it. Now Deshaun Watson's gone, where really we should be switching over to the Kevin Stefanski offense, but now Kevin Stefanski is giving up play calling duties to Ken Dorsey. So that whole thing's a little bit weird to me, throws a wrinkle kind of in my thoughts. But we know Ken Dorsey wants to drop back and throw it. That was kind of part of the reason the Bills got rid of him partway through the season last year was, look, man, we need to lean on the run a little bit more and develop this. I mean, it's just hard for me to see the Browns saying, all right, these runs aren't working, but let's keep at it. So no, I mean, I would think that as this game moves along, 35 or more pass attempts would be the minimum expectation for Jameis in this spot. I mean, unless they can like have 25 minutes time of possession, something like that, right? And just can't get anything going. But if they have kind of a normal game, 11 possessions, 29, 30 minutes time of possession, 35 pass attempts would be the minimum I would expect.
Yeah, and it was, last week, David Njoku was really popular. Obviously, we'll get to that when we get to tight end. But even this week, like none of the pass catchers are projecting to be mega chalk. People seem to be heading to the Bucs guys instead. So anytime you are on a spot that also the field has like no interest in, my ears perk up because I think that gives us a really fun angle this week. Let me toss a few names at you of some other, pocket passers who look like decent values, could find themselves throwing a decent pick this week. Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith, Jordan Love, Joe Burrow. Any of those names excite you in any way?
Yeah. So Geno Smith, I mean, I don't typically roster quarterbacks against the Bills, but I could build around that game environment a little bit. So in MME, I might have some of him. Trevor Lawrence, I don't get why early ownership projections have him as one of the more popular plays on slate. I get it that he's 5,600, but he's played well against New England. He didn't even put up a big score. Green Bay just held CJ Stroud to 86 passing yards, right? They've been one of the best pass defenses in the NFL. And, the Jags don't put anything on easy mode. So they make things harder on Trevor Lawrence. The Packers have kind of this confusing defense that they're running. It's going to make things harder on Trevor Lawrence. So that one's not for me. You mentioned Burrow. I touched on him. Kind of just that game environment is one that I could see building around, especially in MME, but maybe on one of my tighter builds. And then I think you mentioned a fourth guy in there that I missed, as you were saying.
I might have mentioned Love.
Yeah. I won't ever argue against Jordan Love. He doesn't, he's purely a pocket passer. So paying 7,100 for a pocket passer, a guy who might add 1 point with his legs, might add 0 points with his legs, like that's a tough pill to swallow unless you are thinking that you're entering a shootout game environment. So obviously what we like about Love, 15 touchdown passes and he missed a couple games. I believe he's not anymore because Baker passed him, but he was tied for the league lead in touchdown passes before Baker played on Monday night, in spite of missing 2 games. Right. And so that's why his fantasy scores look so good. But this kind of looks like a Keenan Allen set of box scores where you're like, oh man, he never has bad games. And so it just stands out as like automatically a good play. But then how often does he have elite games? He's topped 26 DraftKings points, 26 and change twice. And one of these was, this game where he had to throw a ton. So the other one was like a 29 pointer. So yeah, he's not somebody I'm going out of my way to play. I love the matchup. But again, you got to mix and match the weapons. You don't know who's going to hit. It's unlikely that you get a tournament winner from the bunch. In his last 16 games, they've produced 3 30-pointers from a pass catcher, which is nice, but like not elite. And so, there's just a lot of guesswork and you kind of need the game environment to cooperate. So yeah, I don't mind Jordan Love. He's not a guy that I have strong arguments against, but he's not a guy that I'm going to play because I have a hard time seeing him putting up like the 33, 34 pointer that you really want to be chasing at his price tag. The top of his range seems to be about 28, which would be great. But like when that's the top of the range, I want to try to stay away from it.
One spot we should probably discuss just because it's making a little bit of news this afternoon is that Jaden Daniels, I guess he's trending a little better than expected. He practiced today and they are going to make him a game time decision. Obviously, if he doesn't go, it's Marcus Mariota. Any thoughts on the Commanders in either direction, if it's Daniels or Mariota?
I think there's edge in taking the Commanders as underdogs at home because that line's in place with the expectation that Mariota is going to play. Jaden Daniels, he's got I think 1 game north of 25 DraftKings points, none north of 28, and he's priced up in that 7K price range against really one of the best pass defenses in the NFL. I think that Chicago's second in DVOA against the pass and like 24th against the run. So I have a hard time seeing like the path to him putting up score that you had to have in order to win. And like his range is hurting you up to like a really strong score. But when that's the case, like I'm okay missing the really strong score because I look not at what score a player produced, but like the range I expect them to produce in. So the range has to be, if you're taking on the risk of a bad score, the range has to be tournament winning on the upside. And it's hard to see against this Bears pass defense how the game develops in such a way that he's the piece you had to have. So for me, that's a no. But with the talent, the rushing upside, I can see the argument, but it's just not for me.
Obviously a ton of quarterbacks on this slate. So I'll toss it back to you. Any that I haven't mentioned that you would like to bring up? I know we kind of got your short list here of Anthony Richardson, Bo Nix, and Jameis Winston. Any others we haven't touched on?
I think it's important to mention Tua because I think at first glance, the thought is, oh man, Tua's just so underpriced. Last year, all the time we heard play Tua doubles, but he was, over 7K. So I think it's worth highlighting the fact that, he cracked 24 DraftKings points only 3 times last year. And I've got the numbers in my DFS interpretations, but I think it was like 50% of his games or like 8 out of 17 games that he was like 16 DraftKings points and below last year. So I think I'm going to have some Tua doubles in large field play just because it is so cheap. But I think that people are going to overrate like how underpriced he was. I was surprised to see how low his ownership projections were at the start of the week. But obviously people are going to be on Tyreek Hill. People are going to be on Waddle. I think that'll trickle down to Tua and he'll end up being higher owned than those projections show. I think when I looked, it was like 2.5%. And I would think that he'll be more in like the 6-7% range. So I'll be underweight Tua, but I'll use some of him in large field play. Just somebody worth highlighting because I'm sure people have questions about that one.
Yeah. And I, just my kind of like gut feel on how people kind of think about Tua is people get really excited about what Tua means for Tyreek and Achane in the offense, which rightfully so. I do too. But I do think they view him in that like, he's just going to elevate the offense, but I'm not actually excited to play Tua. I also think if Waddle was, jumping out to people, then I think the double stacks would line up. But I think a lot of people are like, if you're a Dolphins bull, you're basically like, I want to play Achane and Tyreek together. And because Achane will get some on the ground, I just don't need to deal with Tua. I'm just like going through the thought process of how hand builders might approach this. So I don't think Tua gets too steamed, just kind of from that logic.
Yeah, and I think Achane and Tyreek is the sharpest way to play pairings on this offense as well. So, shout out to the field if they go that direction.
All right, let's move over to running back. Probably should be devoting the majority of our time here this week, just because it's probably the strength as far as the positions in a deep kind of well of options here. What are you seeing at the top end or some of your favorite plays?
Yeah, I mean, I think across the board, there are good plays to be had here. In my player grid, I have one guy, and so for those of you who are not OWS members and have never done the free week pass or anything like that, my player grid, I separate things into blue chips, light blue chips, and then bonus plays, and then bonus is tier 1 and tier 2. And so I have just a big group of tier 1 bonus running backs and only one blue chip or light blue chip. And so for me, it's Breece Hall up there at the top just because of the snap rate since Todd Downing took over the play calling. 87%, 82% snap rate in a good matchup. Not as good of a spot as it looks like, right? Everybody who watched that game last week saw the Jags just pushing the Patriots defensive line around. Jags ranked 7th in adjusted line yards. The Jets ranked 32nd. Refresher, there's 32 teams in the NFL, so that's dead last. Not a good offensive line, but still, I mean, just so much talent for Breece Hall. He's involved in the passing attack. He's on the field all the time. So to me, that's kind of the top play. And then the other guy, like there's guys up at the top end of the price range. There's guys down at the sort of, $6K end of the price range, all of whom I really like this week. And none of them is there anything that clearly separates one from the other for me. And so, I mean, the top end, the kind of obvious names, right? Breece Hall, Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, interesting, right? Because the Bills forced the highest target rate to running backs in the NFL. They ranked 31st in DVOA against running backs. They filter targets away from perimeter wide receivers. And so we know Seattle likes to pass the ball. We know that they use Kenneth Walker in the passing game. And before last week, when they only threw the ball 28 times, was coming off target games of 8, 8, and 5. So I think he's really interesting from that perspective in PPR scoring. And then, with Saquon and Mixon, there's not a ton of pass game work. So it's more like, Mixon's not going to hit these big plays. So it's more like, does he keep doing what he's been doing? And just like every play, he's keeping the offense on schedule. He's picking up yards. He's moving the offense forward, 5 yards, 4 yards, 7 yards, 9 yards. And then, adding the touchdowns. And then with Saquon, it's, can he hit these big plays, which he absolutely can. And so both those guys have kind of lower floors than I would love at their price tags. Cause it's not like when we would pay, for Christian McCaffrey at 8.6K or something, you're like, well, he's going to get 5 to 7 targets to kind of elevate his workload. Or Kenneth Walker right now, where we can expect 5 to 8 targets. So these guys, could bomb, right? Saquon's got these games where he's like 7 points before touchdowns, 13 points before touchdowns. And Mixon hasn't had that yet, but he can. But I like both those guys from a ceiling perspective. So broad range of outcomes on those guys. I don't want to tie my whole weekend to either of those guys, but they're both definitely very much in the mix.
One other note I just wanted to mention on Breece Hall, and I'm kind of pulling up the Fantasy Life utilization report here, but there's been a meaningful shift the past 2 weeks where Braylon Allen initially seemed like he was getting a bigger and bigger chunk of that offense, which was a little concerning for Breece Hall. They liked using him around the goal line too, but these past couple weeks, it has snapped back to, Breece Hall really high snap shares, getting a bigger rush attempts, jumping up from like the 50, 60% range up to the mid 80s. So been kind of a return to Breece Hall as a full bell cow. And it does seem like at this price point of, 7,300, he should be priced up here closer to Ken Walker and Henry. So very much with you on that play. Let's circle back to Achane. We mentioned him briefly in conjunction with Tyreek Hill. How do you feel about him in a vacuum here?
Yeah, I mean, I like Achane, right? The Cardinals are a better run defense. I think that people realize they're 10th in the NFL in DVOA against the run. And we've seen them stonewall a handful of good rushing attacks. But with Achane, we're not looking for down to down. If this were Joe Mixon, right, we would say, I'd be a little bit concerned because you need Mixon to be picking up those yards every single play. He's not going to have those big breakaway runs. With Achane, you just need him to be able to produce at a consistent level. And so I forget the numbers. They're in the DFS interpretations, but there's like an outrageous hit rate for Achane in games where he plays, right? He had 2 games last year where he only had 2 touches. So you throw those out. And like in his other healthy games with Tua on the field, it's like 7 out of 12 or something like that, where he's hit for an elite score, which is, unbelievable, especially at this price tag. So yeah, I think Achane's really sharp. I think that on my non-Tyreek rosters, I want to have Achane. And then on some of my Tyreek rosters, I want to have Achane, because chances are pretty good that one of these 2 guys ends up hitting this week. And yeah, even though Achane's not going to have, a lot of these hits that he had last year, Mostert was active. So it's not like, his what we would love is Mostert's out, and we know that Achane's going to get 20 plus touches, but even when that's not the case, he can hit for these big games. And so, yeah, very much in the mix for me this week, and kind of one of those higher ceilings among these cheaper running backs.
Let me throw 2 names at you of guys who are, I guess, have some similarities. They are both maybe not the sexiest of clicks, but they are big home favorites in good matchups. J.K. Dobbins and Javonte Williams. Thoughts on those 2 guys?
Yeah, J.K. Dobbins, he hasn't topped 25 DraftKings points. He catches some passes. It seems like they're at this point, he had the ACL, he had the Achilles. Like, it seems like at this point, they're like, okay, yeah, that early season thing of giving him, a ton of touches, like, let's scale that back a little bit. Obviously, had this kind of heavy touch game against Denver, but yeah, I mean, I would. The Chargers have a really good defense, and the Saints don't have an offense right now. We've got Spencer Rattler, and it looks like Olave's coming back, but we've got this ragtag gang of pass catchers, and so I would expect the Chargers to control this game, which is great for Dobbins, but also can allow the Chargers to kind of alleviate that workload a little bit. They're 3-3 right now, I believe, right? So they win this game, they're 4-3. I mean, they're right in the thick of this playoff hunt, and so they got to be thinking long term as well. So yeah, I mean, I would like Dobbins more if he were about 700 or 800 cheaper, but yeah, I don't think he's going to be a major part of my player pool. But again, if I say I would like him if he's cheaper, that means I still like his opportunity to score 22, 25 DraftKings points. And so in this current meta of the way scoring has been in DFS, like 22 to 25 could be enough, right? So yeah, no major knocks against him. If somebody wants to play him, he's not on my list or in my pool, but he was somebody who I initially put on and then kind of carved out as I got deeper down things. The other guy you mentioned was Javonte Williams. Yeah, no games this year over 18 touches. So that's kind of the drawback. And this is pretty wild, right? Because we know how bad the Panthers are against the run. There's only been 2 starting running backs, 2 number 1 running backs who have topped 20.1 DraftKings points against the Panthers. It was, actually 2 elite guys. Alvin Kamara went for 22. Bijan Robinson went for 25.5. Nobody's kind of run away with a slate against this Panthers backfield. We talked about it last week for anybody who watched of like the issue is number 2 running backs are often seeing as many touches or more touches against this Panthers defense. And so I don't know that we can really take advantage of that with the Broncos because it's not just Jaleel McLaughlin as the number 2, right? They're kind of splitting things up now. And so Javonte's the guy. He's very much in the mix for me, but he's not like separating from the other guys who are available down. I mean, James Conner is available down here. Kareem Hunt's available down here. I wouldn't say that Javonte Williams is separating from those guys for me in my player pool, or that'll have significantly more exposure to him than these other guys that I also like in this range.
Let's see here. Any other, running backs that stand out to you? Maybe some of these other cheap values. A lot of the guys we've been talking about have been on the higher end, but I'm not seeing a lot under 6K that looks good. Did you find any gems down there?
No, I mean, we've got, if you like Jalen McMillan, if you like Trey Palmer, if you like Sterling Shepard, you've got all of those guys available to you. One of those guys is a number 1 wide receiver this week. You have Cedric Tillman, who is actually the Browns' number 1 wide receiver. You have Cade Otton, who I think will be the main target for the Bucs. See 8 to 10 targets. He's 3,500. There are places to save salary this week, and then Tyreek Hill's only 7K. So to get the kind of that top wide receiver on the slate, you don't have to overpay for it. So to me, with kind of the way I'm approaching quarterback, salary's not that tight for me, and so I don't see a need, especially with a lot of running. Like, I expect us to get 2 or 3 really strong scores from the running back position at minimum. And I'll probably have a lot of running back in the flex this week, right? From a strategy perspective, from a roster construction perspective, that's probably worth mentioning. And so, yeah, I mean, I expect some of the stronger scores on the slate to come from that position. And so I want to focus my attention on getting the sharper guys at that position, as opposed to trying to get, a nice salary multiplier or free up salary or whatever at that position. Cause I think we can get some bigger scores cheaper at the pass catcher spots.
One player I want to ask you about is Jahmyr Gibbs. He obviously breaks the slate last week, 35 points. David Montgomery left that game for a brief spell of time, which kind of opened up the door for Gibbs to operate as the lead back. No one's ever really questioned his talent or what he can do with lead back touches. He just doesn't get that often when David Montgomery is healthy. How are you thinking about him and the Lions in this spot?
Yeah, I don't think that his workload is going to increase this week. Like I don't see a reason to expect that. Obviously 19 touches last week, that's kind of the high end of what they like to give him. And we often see a player produce a lot of points in a high scoring game, and then people chase that score the next week in what should be a lower scoring game. Right. So to me, the Titans, really good defense. Their issue is that teams just, their offense can't do anything. So opponents have the ball a lot. And I don't expect the Titans to be able to do a whole lot against this Lions defense. And so, just don't see the scenario where the Lions are aggressively trying to get Jahmyr Gibbs a bunch of extra touches. And this sort of turns into one of these games where he's putting up a huge game. So he's not for me this week. If it's like I had a decent amount of Jahmyr Gibbs exposure last week because you're betting on game environments and you're saying if this game environment takes off, somebody from this offense is going to be putting up monster types of scores. And so, Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously our Minnesota penthouse that we had last week with St. Brown and Justin Jefferson, that was very core to my rosters. And then where I'm not playing that, I'm wanting to think, okay, how does that get broken? Who else on the Lions do I want to mix and match in here? So we can typically see these scores like this 35-pointer coming. We can't predict that it's going to be that high of a score, but we can predict that somebody on the Lions is going to put up a big score in a game like that. And we can predict that we're less likely to see a huge score from somebody on the Lions in a spot like this. So for me, the Lions offense is just outside of Tim Patrick, who is obviously a less strong value than these other cheap wide receivers, but he can hit for a big play. You can say the same thing about Khalif Raymond. And limited volume, he could put up 15, 16, 20 points. Outside of those guys, I'm not going to the Lions this week.
Let me toss two more names at you down in the low sixes. Kareem Hunt, who continues to be a touchdown merchant in this offense. And then DeAndre Swift, a little out of sight, out of mind coming out of the bye here for the Bears. Thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I mean, Swift has been, 3 straight games of 20 plus DraftKings points, and he's looked good. Looks like the Bears are figuring out how to use him. Their offensive line still not great, but definitely like Swift this week. And then I laid this out in the player group, but I'll read it here. Basically, since the start of last year, there have been 12 games of a Kansas City running back seeing the ball, touching the ball 20 plus times. In those 12 games, there was a 10.1 pointer and a 32.5 pointer. So we can kind of throw those out as like the outliers on either end. Every other game has been 14.2 to 27.8 DraftKings points. So that's a pretty good range for a guy who costs $6K. If we expect there's 6,200, 6,300, if we expect that Kareem Hunt's going to see 20 plus touches again in this matchup against the Raiders. So yeah, I mean, to me, he's like, if he scores 14, it's 50% of these games, the score has been, like 16 points and below, right? So if he scores 14 to 16 points, that's not going to surprise me at all. But also if he scores 23, if he scores 25, if he scores 27, that's not going to surprise me at all. It's been like 40% of the games they've produced, these running backs have produced at that level. So, Kareem Hunt has been consistently scoring as well as or better than Pacheco did on that type of volume. So I'm comfortable kind of just copy pasting that same production in that same role. And Kareem Hunt. And again, that's kind of like why I like this slate for the way I play is because I can say, okay, I can have a lot of Jameis, I can have a lot of Richardson. I can mix and match a few other quarterbacks, but I can have a lot of these guys. I can have a heavy bet on Tyreek Hill. And then I can say, DeAndre Swift could score 12. He could score 30. Kareem Hunt could score 14. He could score 26. Like a lot of these guys are like that. So rather than taking a stance, I can take a stance on the places where I feel clearest and then just mix and match these guys and basically say, I'm going to have the right combo of running backs on some rosters. And as long as my core does well, then I'm in great shape because that right combo of running backs is going to be hitting alongside that core that's hitting. And, those tend to be some of my best weeks. Obviously, those tend to be some of my worst weeks as well. Because if the core misses, almost all your rosters are dead in the water. But if the core hits, you can mix and match things from there in sort of a high confidence manner and just be so far ahead of the field.
Speaking of mixing and matching, any other guys that will be in maybe your expanded player pool as far as mixing and matching that I haven't asked you about yet?
Yeah, maybe. But if there are, people can check out the player grid and catch that in there.
There we go. Yeah. Also wanted to pull up this comment here from Noel fan. Always loved OWS, but this year it's like Jam and the team took another big step forward. It's easily the best value in DFS. Thank you for that super chat. Thank you for the kind words, Noel fan, and a good opportunity to remind you guys, you can get up to 40% off with your OWS rest of season subscriptions with promo code Pete40 Pete, and then the number 40 there will get you 40% off, and we'll give you the keys to the kingdom, all of that good stuff, the NFL Edge, the game by game breakdowns, JMs, DFS interpretations, the scroll, the premium podcast, all that good stuff. Anything I'm forgetting there, JM?
I don't know, but shout out to Noel fan, who's one of the sharpest players in DFS. Always great to have him on board for these podcasts, and thanks for hanging out with us.
Yes, appreciate you, Noel fan. Let's head over to wide receiver. We already kind of set the table earlier talking about how there aren't a ton of great options. We do have some value that you were kind of hinting at with the Bucks and the Browns, but let's quickly do Tyreek at the top. He is the cover boy, so we gotta mention him. There was a little panic in the chat. I guess he missed practice yesterday, probably just a veteran rest day. I haven't seen anything to be concerned about. Let's move forward with the assumption Tyreek Hill's good to go. Thoughts on him and why he's our cover boy this week?
Yeah, so he missed, I forget what it was. He missed week 14 last year, or he got injured week 14, missed week 15, and then kind of tailed off weeks 16 through 18. No elite scores, right? If we go before the injury last year, 12 games, he scored 25.8 or more DraftKings points in 9 of those 12 games. That's 25 or 75% of the time. The games where he missed the 25.8 plus, one was against the Patriots early in the season, where, you still had Belichick there last year. You still had Patriots defense buying in, really good defense at the start of the season last year. And the other two were against the Bills and the Chiefs, which are two teams that ranked top 6 by the end of the season last year in fewest yards allowed to wide receivers. So, I mean, basically in every non-difficult, like super difficult matchup, Tyreek Hill hit 25.8 or more DraftKings points. And it's hard to overstate how rare that is. Like, the easiest way I can present this is just to remind you guys something I talk about sometimes, that DraftKings typically prices players in such a way that they're going to hit roughly 4x their salary, roughly 25% of the time. So we've got a guy who did this 75% of the time last year, and the 3 times he didn't were spots where you could have predicted that his chances of doing that were much lower. Like, if I can go back in time, I believe I had little to no Tyreek Hill exposure all 3 of those weeks, and then heavy Tyreek Hill exposure the other weeks, right? We can see those games coming. And so, this just looks like a tremendous spot for Tyreek Hill. Early ownership projections are like 20%. Genuinely, I think we'll see him 60% owned in single entry tournaments, but I don't think that's a reason to fade him. Like, I almost never go 100% on a player because I want to leave myself out in MME for if that player misses, like has a bad game or gets hurt or whatever it might be. But I still want to go overweight Tyreek Hill this week. So I'll probably put 80% Tyreek Hill on the bank machine. And then on that other 20% of rosters, try to think through like how I can take advantage if Tyreek Hill ends up having a bad game, how I can, like, what it might mean for somebody else on the Dolphins or for the rest of the slate if Tyreek Hill has a bad game. But to me, it just looks like a free square that I'm not going to overthink. And, if he has a bad week, I'll still position myself to do well, but most of my rosters are going to bet on him having the type of week that, we typically see from him.
Yeah, and this was I wrote about it in my Fantasy Life DFS article this week, just like a weird pricing glitch on the Dolphins. We've known for a while Tua was going to be back. These salaries would be, what would you say if their salaries were actually
8,600, 86, 87, 88. Yeah, I mean, somewhere in that range.
Just absurd, which, to your point, like when I looked at these early ownership projections, and I've been stunned that he isn't much higher, just with how much value there is on the slate. It's like he's already cheap. It's so easy to get him in. But I will digress on that. Let's stay at the top end though, outside of Tyreek Hill. I'll kind of throw a few names at you. So some of our favorites from last week, Amon-Ra and AJ Brown. You got both the Bengals wide receivers, Drake London. Anything stand out up there for you?
I mean, I'm not playing him on Raw because, again, I want to think about how he has a big game, and I just don't see this being the type of game environment where he has to, and he can always put up 20, 22, 26, something like that, but he's certainly highly unlikely to bury me for not playing him, and he could put up like a 16, 17 pointer in this one. Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, I think the way to play them is together, because you're ideally hoping for that, basically the Cincinnati penthouse this week of saying these two guys feed off each other, and this ends up being a game environment that you wanted to have pieces of. What do you think I think about Drake London? Like, I'm not playing Drake London. This is Keenan Allen. This is Michael Pittman at 7,200. He needs his role, the type of player Drake London is an awesome NFL player. His role and the type of player he is, he needs heavy volume in order to hit. And I don't see, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin being out, I don't see this turning into a shootout where Atlanta's having to throw the ball 50 plus times. So he's not for me. Stephon Diggs, I'm going to mix and match. I could conceivably go with 100% of rosters have at least one Texans piece. And they would all have exactly one Texans piece. So I should say it like that. Diggs would be kind of behind Tank Dell and Joe Mixon for me. He's gone 20 straight games without cracking 100 yards,
Crazy. 20
straight games without cracking 23 DraftKings points. He's 7,500, but he still has it within his range of outcomes to get that 100-yard bonus and have a 2-touchdown game. So I don't want to totally discount the potential for Diggs to hit, but kind of looking at early ownership, he was like the most popular of the bunch, and he'll be kind of farther down my own list, but he will be somebody I have exposure to. I spent a lot of time thinking about Devontae Adams, but even going back 3 years ago, right? He was 3 years younger. Aaron Rodgers was 3 years younger. His games of I think it was north of 23 DraftKings points. He had, it's off the top of the head, I think he had 7 of those games in 2021. And 6 of them were 13 or more targets, or maybe all of them were 13 or more target games, right? Because he's not hitting for big plays, and Aaron Rodgers isn't throwing the ball deep downfield. He loves throwing these slant passes and these kind of short area mind meld passes with Devontae Adams. So you really need heavy volume. And so unless the Patriots push things in this game, I have a hard time seeing Devontae getting up to 13, 14, 16, 18 targets. I do think he's interesting. I don't know how much I'll have of him, or I should say, I don't know if I'll have him on tighter builds this week, but just an interesting guy to think about. And then another guy up here, Zay Flowers. It doesn't seem like people are going to want to play him. The ankle last week, and it's hard to tell how hurt he was. He can't, there was no real talk about it. No sideline reporter Zay Flowers is questionable to return, and then now he's back. It was just kind of Zay Flowers looked like he was crying, and then he was back on the field, and he played the rest of that game, but didn't see targets. And he missed Wednesday, Thursday practice today. We don't know yet in what capacity, or I don't know yet in what capacity, but yeah, I mean, Cleveland, we talked about Baltimore giving up all these downfield throws. Cleveland has given up the 6th most pass plays of 20 plus yards. They allow the highest deep throw rate in the NFL, very aggressive Jim Schwartz defense. So they're going to give up downfield throws, and they're kind of this defense that's hey, we'll get in your face, we'll attack you, and we're not going to let you march the field, right? We're either going to stop you or you're going to hit big plays and we'll get the ball back. And so that's why those Flacco games were so fun last year, was because a lot of them, the Browns weren't stopping opponents. The Browns were getting hit for these big plays. And then Flacco's cool, I'll come back and throw the ball downfield. So I'm hoping we get a game like that developing. And so Zay Flowers, another one who I think really interesting in this spot.
Yeah, I like that. And I feel like there's been a couple of weeks where Zay Flowers was going to be way more popular and he wasn't quite your cup of tea. But now this week with the injury tag at this price, I don't think anyone's playing Zay Flowers. So I like getting to him as well. Let's talk about some of the value. You mentioned the Bucs wide receivers. You basically have 3 guys here who all are, kind of showing as values. Do you have a favorite of, Jalen McMillan, Trey Palmer, and Sterling Shepard?
Yeah, my favorite of the 3 is Cade Otton.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, no, I mean the Bucs are running the ball really well, and it looks like Bucky Irving's going to be able to play. So they've got 3 really good running backs, and you can't throw the ball downfield against Atlanta, but you can drive the field against Atlanta. Trey Palmer's Trey Palmer's been used in the short areas this year. His average depth of target is 6'2" or 6'6", something like that. But last year was 11.1. He's kind of this downfield guy. Jalen McMillan's average depth of target, I think 13.9. So again, downfield type of role. And then Atlanta takes away these downfield throws. You got to kind of work underneath. Here's what I think. I think that the Bucs end up throwing the ball about 30 times. And that would be pretty standard for games against Atlanta. I think the Bucs end up throwing the ball about 30 times. And then if you say 8 of those go to running backs, because typically their typical target rate would put about 6 to 7 targets to running backs on 30 pass attempts. But, you probably bump that up a little bit. So 8 of those go to running backs, a couple throwaways. Then even if they throw the ball 30 times, that leaves 20 passes. Well, Cade Otton's been getting 8 to 10 targets pretty consistently. They've bumped up his first read target rate, his design target rate. Like those have gone up by about 50% from Dave Canales' offense last year to Liam Cohen's offense this year. So they're already designing plays for Cade Otton. If he soaks up 8 targets, like that leaves 12 for Sterling Shepard, Jalen McMillan, Trey Palmer. And they're just kind of these like 4 to 6 target type guys that you can typically find down at the lower end of the price range. So I am not like personally, and there's other guys on OWS who are treating them differently. And I think most of the industry is treating them differently. So just listening to this, take this as like one data point, one way to think about it, one stance that you can take. But the way that I'm seeing it is I don't think that these guys just step into the Mike Evans, Chris Godwin roles and just see a ton of targets. And so it's harder for me to see one of these guys just blasting off for a huge game. I think all of these guys are viable. I'm going to have exposure to all these guys in MME. Probably each of these guys will show up on one of my tighter builds, but I'm going to be underweight the field on all 3 of these guys is how I'm looking at it.
You mentioned having a little bit of interest in that Buffalo-Seattle game environment. We are going to have some value on the Seahawks with DK Metcalf out. Any thoughts on, JSN, Tyler Lockett, and I'm even seeing a little love for Jake Bobo these days.
Yeah, the Jake Bobo one is interesting, right? But Jake Bobo playing on the perimeter, Bills, I think they allow the lowest perimeter target rate in the NFL. If not the lowest, is one of the lowest. It's just not how you can attack that Buffalo defense. So, I tend to, I've over the last 5-6 years, whatever, I've just avoided wide receivers against Sean McDermott. And it's one of those things where every once in a while it comes back to bite you, but over macro, right? If we talk about play out the slate 100 times, well, what about just like taking a sample size of 6 or 7 seasons and you can just have a rule that's like almost never going to hurt you and that people are going to play into too often. And so even when people when a wide receiver has a big game against the Bills, it's rarely a tournament winner. And so Jake Bobo would be the guy because of how cheap he is that I'd be like, oh, maybe you go here, but he doesn't line up well for this matchup. And then there's much better value. And so, yeah, that's not a spot that I'm going. But again, like where I'm stacking that game, it's probably going to be Josh Allen with Amari, Josh Allen with Khalil Shakir, and then bring it back with Kenneth Walker, something like that, right? Even Josh Allen with Dalton Kincaid, bring it back with Kenneth Walker. I'm going to leave the pass catchers on Seattle alone. I could see it happening, but that's definitely not going to be where I'm looking this week.
Let me throw another guy who looks like a decent value that you brought up in week 1. You said he was going to win someone $1 million at some point. Is this the week for Ladd McConkey?
I saw the ownership. So what are we expecting? We're expecting the Saints to score a bunch of points and force the Chargers out of their run-heavy mode against the Saints defense that's like the 2nd or 3rd worst run defense in the NFL. I don't see it. I admitted like week 3 or 4 on here that I was wrong on the Justin Herbert read of like they're going to have games where they're throwing the ball 35 times and Ladd McConkey and Josh Palmer are going to be there. I really like Ladd McConkey as a player. I think if he's getting 8 to 10 targets, he's going to be a valuable guy. I have a hard time seeing this being a game environment where they need to throw the ball a bunch and where this ends up playing in his favor. So can Ladd McConkey can he put up 20 points for somebody who plays him? Yes. Can he put up 7 points for somebody who plays him? Yes. Can he bury me for not playing him? I don't think so. Like, I don't think that on Sunday evening, I'm going to be like, God, I couldn't win because I didn't have Ladd McConkey. This feels like when you say something like that out loud, like it feels like a clip that's going to be cut and like played after Ladd McConkey has 30 points, right? But it's like, we play at the slate 100 times in this matchup, in this game environment. It just doesn't make sense that you would expect that. We always want to think about game environment as opposed to just players and matchups or pricing. It doesn't make sense to me. I know wide receiver is thin this week, right? So people are trying to like branch out and grab lots of different things. It just doesn't make sense to me that the Chargers coaches are going to say, man, let's just let it rip this week against this really bad Saints run defense when we love to run the ball and we should be in control of this game. And that's one of those things that projection systems can't really take into account is like how a team is going to change from week to week based on the matchup and all that. So yeah, that's my take on Ladd McConkey.
Yeah, it was, I thought, encouraging last week. We did finally see Justin Herbert throw the ball a good bit. I think he finished with like 350 passing yards. Will Dissly had a really good game there. The other thing about Ladd is his workload has been great. He had some bad drops in that game. He had the fumble. So I don't know. I'm leaving a candle on that he can kind of, eliminate some of those mistakes and finally put together, what I would hope as like a a 90% Deontay Johnson game, where he's just getting fed and can accumulate there. But I see what you're saying. I think we're going to save a little bit of the Browns for the lineup build. So that'll be a tease there. Any other wide receivers that you think are worth discussing here?
Yeah, there's probably a few others, but in the interest of time and saving something for the player grid, we'll skip over anything we missed. I do want to just mention Tank Dell again. I think that's a sharp way to play that Texans offense, and probably a player that's going to go overlooked relative to how much I'll be playing him for sure.
Yeah, that's a little spoiler alert. I have my video that comes out on the Deposit Kingdom YouTube channel that's specifically looking at Battle Royale plays. And I sheepishly went back to the well with Tank Dell. And it's never fun, like going to a guy after you were on him the previous week. He fails. He drops a touchdown on the first drive of the game, and you just feel silly. And it's like, I don't know, man. The setup is good again.
He didn't fail. I mean, he dropped a touchdown, but CJ Stroud threw for 86 yards.
Yes.
Like the Packers absolutely like worked over that offense, and the Colts are not equipped to do that. So to me, it's like this is the perfect bounce back spot for this offense.
All right, let's see. Last week, Jam, you were surprisingly excited to talk tight end on your sentiment meter to have tight end discourse. Where is it at this week?
Yeah, I mean, similar, right? Last week, I don't remember exactly who I was hitting on, but in my rosters, it was Bowers who hit. It was Kelsey who didn't hit. It was Njoku who hit. And it was this idea of you can play two tight ends, and I had like Johnny Munt on my set because, last week value was so thin and pricing was so tight. I had Johnny Munt on my Sam Darnold rosters. I had Theo Johnson on my Daniel Jones rosters. I had Cal Cetera on my Jalen Hurts rosters. And then on those rosters, you can still put like my 1,500 single entry was two tight ends with Johnny Munt on a Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown build. And then you throw David Njoku in the flex and you get that extra upside there at that position. So I mean, I think that skip over Trey McBride, who's, in a tough matchup can still hit. He's kind of tier 2 for me, but all these guys here at the top, Bowers, it's like we talk so much about touchdowns being important for upside, but he's got one touchdown on the year and he's just consistently putting up because he gets so many targets and so many catches, and he hasn't even hit the 100-yard bonus yet. And he's been close 3 different times. So it's like, do I expect the Raiders to score a bunch of points against the Chiefs? No. Do I think Bowers has a 2-touchdown game in him in this spot? No. And yet he's kind of the rare situation where it's like, man, and I still like him at this price tag. So Bowers and Njoku are kind of the top 2 guys here, where they're going to be so central to their offense. They're both probably seeing double-digit targets, or if not double digits, then close to double digits. And then kind of a step below them would be Kelsey, Evan Ingram. And then if I play some Josh Allen, I'll mix in Kincaid. And then a step below that would be Trey McBride. And then, there's other guys who have ceiling, like Cole Kmet has ceiling. So if I have some Caleb Williams in large field play, then it'll be like, I'll have Caleb Williams double. So it'll mix and match DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, DeAndre Swift, Cole Kmet, right? 2 of those guys across Caleb Williams rosters, but probably not isolating him outside of that. Cal Cetera, again, Hurts only threw it 14 times last week, but if this turns into a game environment that you had to have, well, then all of a sudden Hurts is thrown at 28 to 30. Cal Cetera has a chance to see 6 or 7 targets on the cheap. People will be off him because they're going to be on Otton. And so I probably won't play him off of game environment builds there, but he becomes interesting if you're building around that game. So, it's kind of like these guys at the top, then like some interesting game environment bets. Jonnu Smith was another guy. Did we hit on Jonnu Smith in the show?
You mentioned him when he scored. I remember you, because we were, some of the plays are normally on my radar, and I was like, that's the first person I've heard mention Jonnu Smith this week. I thought of you.
Probably like 15% exposure. P-Rich had him in that roster that won the slant by 15 points. It's just like, they design plays for him when they have to, and that was a spot where you're going to have to design plays for Jonnu Smith. I mean, he's not on the radar this week, but point being, like, you can kind of find these plays sometimes at tight end, and they can really be separators because most people are just like, where can I get something that's not awful at the position? So yeah, I think these 5K to 6K guys, similar to what we talked about last week, they're really undervalued if you compare them to wide receivers and running backs in that same price range. And then, some guys that you can bet on for upside in game environments. And then kind of the 2 guys cheaper that stand out on paper. Cade Otton, like I said, I mean, they're just designing plays for him. After Mike Evans went down, they had 2 screen passes for him, like across their next couple drive series. And so I think he's very interesting this week, and kind of viewing him as their number 1 wide receiver, so to speak, in terms of not for big plays necessarily, but in terms of just moving the field, putting together drives. And remember, Atlanta, they don't allow downfield passing, but they're really bad at stopping drives because they can't get pressure on the quarterback. So, they can drive the field through Cade Otton. And then I think, kind of the guy who's going to go overlooked that could be the play off of Cade Otton, in that, like, Cade Otton probably it will be surprising if he doesn't put up at least 8 to 12 DraftKings points. But just because he's getting this workload doesn't mean he's going to put up 20, right? And so it's like things have to break his way for him to put up 20. If he puts up 8 to 12, that's you're happy with that. But also you might be able to beat that score somewhere else. I think Dalton Schultz, one of these guys that you could beat that score with. Again, throw out last week, and he's got 6 and 8 targets the 2 games before that, where they were actually succeeding, and no Nico Collins. That's kind of how he's going to be used. So he could be in this kind of 7, 8, 9 target range, whereas Otton's going to be in this 8, 9, 10 target range. So I think Schultz kind of has this opportunity to outproduce Otton, not as sharp of a play as Otton, but in terms of outmaneuvering the field, he's a guy to consider this week.
Yeah, I like that. And like you said, that if you count last week as a bit as an aberration, the previous 2 weeks, once Nico was out of the lineup, his targets really jumping, really solid targets per route run there for a tight end in weeks 5 and 6. So yeah, like I said, I'm going back to the well with the Texans this week. I do like that game. I do just want to mention, as always, we got 2 premium shows this week. I see Chris became a YouTube member. We do DFS After Dark on Saturday nights, having my pal Mike Zakarian on from Team Hold, a great YouTuber over there. Focuses a bit more on NBA stuff, but we're going to talk NFL, NBA content, all of that good stuff. We'll do some drafts, build some teams, all of that. And then Sunday morning, we got the Cram at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. We go over all the overnight news, latest ownership projections. We run the sims, we build some lineups, do some pick'ems, do some drafts, all that good stuff. Very good time. And also a great spot to kind of pull the sharp chat, see what everybody's on. It's helped me kind of navigate where I want to go with my lineups. All right, it's time to do the block party and build a team here on DraftKings. We have the Deposit Kingdom Weekly League. As always, similar to the previous weeks, it is a 1,200 person contest, $10 3 max rake free, $2,000 up top. And you are lucky because there are still less than 300 spots available. The only spot you can get the link is in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. If you guys haven't been in the Discord, the link is down below. You go to the announcement section, you'll find this link, and then I review the winning teams on the Portfolio Review Show, which is a show I do every Monday at 10 a.m. JM, we kind of teased it. I think people have seen where we're going here, but let people know what is our block today.
Yeah, so I'm calling this block core because it's going to be kind of core to what I'm doing. And it's one of these weeks where how does this block fit together from a correlation standpoint? It doesn't necessarily fit together from a correlation standpoint, but it's this idea of, Pete, I told you before the show, like the actual block is even bigger than this, but I can't give away like 6 players of a core build for me that I'm going to mix and match around. But it's this idea of like, if I get this core right, like this is high confidence on this slate. And if we played up the slate 100 times, like you're going to hit on these plays at their prices more often than most other plays. If you get it right, then you can mix and match around that. And you're just so far ahead of the field. So it's just a good way to think through like how we get to first place in a tournament. So this sets up as every week's a little bit different. And this sets up as a particular type of week where I want to just have a core of players that I have high confidence on. Jameis, we're going to throw Jameis in here at quarterback. Jameis will probably be my lowest owned of this core, but he's still going to be on, 40, 50% of my rosters, right? Like Jameis is just like, I'm not saying that Jameis is a slam dunk to have a big game. It's just that the way that things set up, it's like he's underpriced. He should be 600, 700, 800 more than he's priced at. I like the way this game environment sets up for volume. And so I'm willing to take that kind of single entry swing on Jameis, so to speak. Tyreek Hill is going to go on this roster. And then we're going to put 2 Browns pass catchers on here. So we can mix and match the Browns pass catchers. But what I want to do here is isolate 2 guys to talk about, and they don't both have to go on this roster, but we've touched on Njoku. Elijah Moore, he's not getting schemed targets. It's like the play breaks down and sometimes he gets some passes. So I want to talk about Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy real quickly. So Cedric Tillman last week, he had 10 targets 4, Jerry Jeudy had a single target in that game. Cedric Tillman was like seeing schemed targets from the very beginning of the game. I think it was their second pass of the game. He was the shorter route on like an over under, and where that's typically the place the ball is going to go. The next like 2 passes later, he was the first read on a downfield crossing route that they threw the ball to him. He had a couple end zone targets, one of which was schemed to go to him. They had a trick play that was schemed to go to him. And so very much they were like, let's put Cedric Tillman in and put him in this Amari Cooper role and treat him like Amari Cooper in this spot. So Cedric Tillman at 3,300 to me is just an outrageous value, because unlike the Bucs game where it's like, I expect them to throw the ball about 30 times and they'll throw to running backs, and I think Cade Otton's going to be heavily involved. Well, in this spot, it's like, I expect the Browns to throw it 35 to 40 times, and they're not going to throw the ball to running backs, and they like to throw the ball downfield. And Cedric Tillman's actually like the clear number 1 in this spot, and he's only 3,300. So Cedric Tillman is going to be probably my highest owned of these Browns pieces. But then Jerry Jeudy, the moment Jameis came in, he started targeting Jerry Jeudy. So 3 of his first 5 passes went to Jerry Jeudy. All 5 of Jerry Jeudy's targets came on Jameis's 11 pass attempts.
Wow.
So as soon as Jameis came in, he was like, all right, this is my guy, right? And I think that people are going to look at Jeudy at 4,800 and be like, well, that's an overpay. He's kind of in this weird price range where he's not in the 6Ks and 7Ks where you are drawn to the guys. He's not in the 3Ks where there's a lot of value this week. So I think Judy's really interesting this week. In fact, let's do that. Let's build a unique one here where we go, because we might be able to then go 3 running backs on this roster. I'm going to have a lot of running back in the flex this week, a lot of tight end in the flex this week. So we can actually go Jeudy and Cedric Tillman and see what that leaves for us. Because then we can throw Cade Otton in here at tight end and really just have a great feel for salary moving forward. There's actually going to be a quick lineup build because it kind of starts building itself, right? If we want to try to go, we're not going to put in Njoku here and in the flex, because then we've got this triple stack, which I might have some of that, but that's not what we're doing here. And so then let's go over to defense. Just then we kind of have a feel for what we have. Defense, because I'm going, I'll say it like this. First off, the Broncos are playing Bryce Young. Broncos might be the best defense in football. They're playing Bryce Young at home. The Chiefs might be the best defense in football. They're not as great of a DFS producer. They're playing Gardner Minshew. It's on the road, but in Las Vegas, where it's going to feel like kind of a home game for Kansas City. The Chargers might have the best defense in football, and they're playing Spencer Rattler and like a banged up New Orleans team at home. So I think that these 3 defenses just stand out. And because I can save salary in other places, I'm not worried about the price I'm paying for them. All of my rosters will have one of these 3 defenses, or if Mariota plays, I'll have a little bit of Bears exposure, but I'm not going outside these 3 defenses. So we can pick which one we want to put on here and then mess around from there.
Yeah. Going to put Broncos in. It is fun. Like you were saying, it's because it's like you want access to the Broncos points in this spot. And, if we're not playing Bo Nix, we could talk a little bit about if we did want to do Javonte Williams, but it's like, I know this Broncos team is going to get points. The defense seems like a very strong candidate to soak up a good portion of those. So let's go Broncos. The other note I just want to say why I like this Jameis Winston block is my guess is a super majority of Jameis Winston teams will come preloaded with David Njoku. That's going to be the most comfy thing. So immediately, Winston's already not going to be super popular. Then not with Njoku, I think is going to be very unique.
Which also means not with Otton, which also means then if you play Njoku with Otton, like that's another way to separate these rosters. It just is very easy to separate these rosters from what the field's going to be doing. And if we want to run a quick tally on like what some of these guys should be priced at, let's say we're saving $700 on Jameis Winston. Let's say we're saving conservatively $1,600 on Tyreek Hill. So we're at $2,300 saved right there. Let's say Judy's appropriately priced. Honestly, I would say Cedric Tillman should be $5,700. Maybe that's a hot take. Oh, it definitely is a hot take. But like to me, it just seems obvious. Like watching that game last week, watching how they were designing the offense, knowing how Jameis likes to play. So that would be $4,700 that we're saving. Let's say Cade Otton should be at least $4,200 or $4,300. So we're up at like $5,500 that we've saved on this roster. It's as if we're getting a 55K salary cap. We're increasing our salary cap by 10% just based on the fact that these guys are underpriced. And then in the context of most guys are overpriced right now, this just puts us so far ahead of the field. We basically just filled out our roster with underpriced guys where most players on the slate are overpriced. And so I just see it as a big edge in building. And then honestly, we might even have to go up somewhere because we're saving. Like we might have to go up to Brock Bowers or something, because we're saving so much in salary here on this roster. Or we could go, Saquon and Kenneth Walker and, see what that leaves us for that last running back spot, 6,400. So we can go whichever of these 6K running backs you want to go to, whether that is DeAndre Swift, whether that is Kareem Hunt. And like I said, to me, I'm not taking stances on these guys because I don't need to. Like to me, none of these guys are separating in the research and the way I'm seeing them. And so rather than inorganically taking a stance, I'm just going to mix and match these guys. Hope I get the right guy on my highest dollar single entries, but also, I build 10, 12, 13 different single entry 3 max rosters and kind of drop them into different contests. And then obviously MME, I'll have to mix and match. So I'll have an opportunity to have the right combo in there.
Yeah. I mean, what would you think about, you mentioned some of those low guys. Would this be a roster you would maybe consider putting Achane in and playing that Dolphins block?
Yeah. I mean, Achane, I think it was 4 of his 7 hits. Tyreek Hill has hit alongside him, right? So it's not like you have to play one without the other. Achane and Tyreek can hit side by side. So it's just a unique build. And you're basically telling a story of Browns throw the ball a bunch and Jameis does well enough. He doesn't have to have a monster game. He just has 165 points could have won the slant last week, right? Like if Jameis just has a solid game, then we're getting well over 4x salary multipliers on these guys. We're probably getting a 4x salary multiplier better on Tyreek Hill. And now all of a sudden we're just way ahead of the field. Cade Otton probably gets you a 4x salary multiplier, and just sort of in this like build a roster without thinking too much about the correlation type of approach, you're suddenly way ahead of the field, which is just, a unique, rare way to win a tournament or to approach winning a tournament. But this is a week that sets up like that.
Yep. As always, the usual caveats. This lineup building exercise is meant to give you ideas to kind of help you understand the thought process you should be going through as you construct a roster. Lots of different ways to land this plane. But I do think that building block and thinking through ways of taking advantage of value in unique ways is a really good kind of angle to approach a slate like this, where there is a ton of value that you can't just completely ignore, but you also don't want to just be running out a cash game team out there against everyone else. JM, let the people know what else you guys got going on over at OWS this week.
Yeah, I have not consumed any content from anyone else on the site yet. So I'm excited to conclude my player grid here in the next few hours, conclude the Angles podcast. I'll have my show with Squirrel Patrol over on Roto Grinders, get his thoughts on the slate. And then I'll kind of open up my mind and see, one of my favorite shows is Rich Rebar from Sharp Football Analysis and Hilo doing Searching for Ceiling on the OWS podcast feed, OWS YouTube, 2 just incredibly sharp guys who understand football and these teams so well. See what they're saying, see what Mike and Hilo and Pappy are saying in the NFL Edge, see what everybody says in the scroll this week, and see if I change my perspective on anything. And if I do, you'll get the updates on Sunday morning in my Sunday morning update in the player grid. But yeah, I see this as a very unique type of slate. And really, like, to me, I don't mind playing it like a single entry player, right? So it's like, if I'm wrong, that's okay. But if I'm right, I'm going to be so far ahead of the field. I'll have like 30, 40, 50 rosters that have a shot at winning a contest. And so, look at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday and see if I've got nothing at the top or if I've got like a bunch of mine at the top. It'll be one or the other this week.
And you can do the same for me and you won't find anything. No, one of these days we're going to get up to the top there. Right after this, as usual, I got Off and On the Clock with the Badge Bros. We'll be doing a very similar structured show as the Block Party, but going through the slate from an underdog perspective. So best scroll down plays, ADP values, how we're approaching the small and large field contest. We'll build some pick'ems, all of that good stuff. That'll be at 2:30. You can stay here at this channel to refresh. You can catch it on the Badge Bros. And yeah, otherwise I will see you guys on Monday for the portfolio review. For JM, I'm Pete. This has been the Block Party. We'll see you guys next time. Good luck this week.